All right, let's take a look at evaluating deductive arguments and specifically the counterexample method for testing invalidity. So we've learned a few basic deductive forms by now. We focused on learning some valid forms, but not all deductive arguments have a valid form. Some of them are invalid. Remember, the idea of a deductive argument is that the truth of the premises will guarantee necessarily the truth of the conclusion. So that's a very robust form of argument to have. It meets a higher standard than it's a stronger form of proof than, say, an inductive argument. Validity is an all or nothing thing. So again, let's kind of rehearse a few of our basic key ideas here. As I've just been talking about, validity is what we're looking for. Really, soundness is what we're looking for. We're looking for deductive arguments that are both valid and have all true premises. That's called a sound argument when it meets both of those conditions. If an argument, a deductive argument, and what I'm saying here in this video is all about deductive arguments. If we find a deductive argument in which the truth of the premises doesn't guarantee the truth of the conclusion, then we have an invalid argument. So notice our definition of validity right here is a deductive argument in which it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. So an invalid argument is an argument in which it is possible to have true premises and a false conclusion. So again, what we're looking for are sound arguments, but the first test for determining what the soundness of an argument is to consider the validity of the argument. And so here's where the counterexample method comes in. Let's take a look at an argument here. We'll call this the Gene Simmons argument. And you probably notice it might look a little bit similar to some of the argument forms we've already learned. But in this argument, it has a different form, right? So we have here the first premise. If Gene Simmons has been killed in a plane crash, then he is dead. That's a true statement because if you get killed in a plane crash, then you are dead. So the truth of the consequent necessarily follows from the truth of the antecedent. Excuse me, there should be an A there. Consequent and antecedent there. Then we have Gene Simmons has not been killed in a plane crash. That's also a true statement, at least as far as I know today. I didn't get an alert about Gene Simmons. Then we get the conclusion line that Gene Simmons is not dead. Also a true statement as far as I know today. I did check this morning before recording this video. So if you don't know who Gene Simmons is, maybe this will help. He's the bass player, one of the founding members of the band Kiss that recently retired. Now they have avatars, so that'll be fun. So again, here's our basic argument. If Gene Simmons has been killed in a plane crash, then Gene Simmons is dead. Gene Simmons has not been killed in a plane crash. Therefore, Gene Simmons is not dead. So the counterexample method involves a few basic steps. So 4 of them, right? And the first one for us in our example has already been taken care of because I presented it in a reconstructed or proper or standard form already. If you have an argument that's in casual English or everyday language, in other words, you do need to reconstruct it because you got to be able to identify that underlying form. And so go ahead and take your casual argument, reconstruct it so that you restate the premises as completely but as succinctly as possible in the order that the author of that argument gives them, leading down to the conclusion. And then we're going to identify the underlying form of that argument. So if we go back to this argument here, I'll write this in blue here. We notice that this argument has the following form. I'm going to use K for killed in a plane crash. So premise 1 is if Gene Simmons has been killed in a plane crash, then Gene Simmons is dead. So I'll use D for Gene Simmons is dead. So we have if K, then D, Second line is Gene Simmons has not been killed in a plane crash, so I used K for killed in a plane crash, so not killed in a plane crash is not K. And then our last line, the conclusion is Gene Simmons is not dead, so thus not D for not dead. So there's the underlying form of our argument. So we've got the argument reconstructed, we've identified the form, and then the next thing we need to do, and this is where a good bit of work comes in, is coming up with our substitution instance. So the reason why that involves a lot of work is because we've got to determine whether it's possible to create a substitution instance with true premises and a false conclusion. If we are able to do that, then we know we got an invalid argument. Right? So substitution instance. This, again, requires some work to come up with one, but that's just where the thinking comes in here. So again, there's our underlying form of that argument, and we're looking for a substitution instance that has true premises and a false conclusion. So here's my substitution instance. If George Washington was assassinated, then he is dead. George Washington was not assassinated, therefore George Washington is not dead. Notice that this argument has that same form. If assassinated, then he's dead. Not assassinated, therefore not dead. Right? Just a different variable in there, but it has the same form as the Gene Simmons argument. But, and this is the key thing here, we've got true premises and a false conclusion. So we've figured out here that it's possible to reconstruct an argument with the same underlying structure as our original argument, but that has true premises and a false conclusion. Remember, our definition of validity is the impossibility of true premises and a false conclusion. So we know that this argument form is invalid. The truth of the premises won't guarantee the truth of the conclusion in an argument with this form. So again, not going to guarantee the truth of the conclusion. So we got an invalid argument. That argument form is really one of our formal fallacies. Again, a formal fallacy is a deductively invalid argument, and that Gene Simmons argument has the form of denying the antecedent here. So you'll notice if P, then Q, not P, thus not Q. And again, if you've learned the parts of various propositions that we've been using in these deductive arguments, like consequent and antecedent, then this form denying the antecedent tells you what's going on. Here's our antecedent, here's the denial of that antecedent, and then the attempt to derive the denial of the consequent as the conclusion. But again, this is an invalid form. So once you recognize the form is invalid, you don't have to worry about whether the premises are true or not. You know that this is a bad argument on form alone. And the same is true for this other one called affirming the consequent. Again, if P, then Q. Q is our consequent. There's the affirmation of that consequent, and then the attempt to derive the antecedent as the conclusion. But again, this will admit of the possibility of true premises and a false conclusion, so it's an invalid form as well. Again, these are formal fallacies. Those are the same as an invalid deductive argument. So to recap, when we're evaluating deductive arguments and we know we've got such an argument in hand, then our first question is it a valid argument or not? And then are all the premises true? If all the premises are true, right? If we have a valid argument and all the premises are true, then we've got a sound argument and we got to accept the truth of that conclusion.